Hello, good morning and welcome to our morning debate hosted by Fer de France. It's lovely to have you here. Welcome if you are watching online or if you've joined us here in La Galerie this morning. It's lovely to have your company. Thank you for making us part of your COP21. Now, Fer de France has invited some really interesting guests to these morning debates to talk about the vital role that railway has, not only in fighting climate change, but also in bringing more economic value to an area, helping people's lives and generally making the world a better place. Allow me to introduce my guests this morning. First of all, sitting on my right, let me start with Nicolas Jachet. It's lovely to have you here, Nicolas. Thank you. Nicolas is the president of Fer de France. Fer de France is an association that rail sector, both at home and abroad. Transport authorities, the state operators, engineering companies, many different organisations coming under the Fer de France banner. Nicolas is also the chairman and CEO of Aegis, the engineering group that operates throughout the world. Outside France, a French company, but that operates outside France as well. In fact, I think something like 53% of your turnover was actually generated outside France in 2014. Nicolas, it's lovely to have you here. Thank you. Sitting next to Nicolas is Louis Negre, member of the Senate, member of Parliament, and also the mayor of Cannes-sur-le-Mer. It's lovely to have you here, Louis. Thank you for taking the time this morning. Louis is also the president of GART. As I'm sure you're aware, GART is formed of something like 263 different transport authorities. Have I got that right, 263? Or is it even more, going up almost every day? Urban councils, indeed, many, many more. Urban councils, regional councils, all with the objective of improving public transport for people within their areas. And interestingly, they say that the poor and those far or with reduced mobility should all benefit from the best possible transport. It'd be really good to have Louis' views this morning. And then sitting on my left this morning, our special guest is John Lamont. Now, John Lamont is the CEO of Transport for Greater Manchester. Now, this is the body that coordinates all the bus, the train, the tram services right across the region. It is an area of the UK, of which is now commonly referred to as the Northern Powerhouse, and I know John will talk more about that in a moment. John, incidentally, was the former CEO of Tube Lines, responsible for Jubilee, Northern and Piccadilly lines in London during the Olympics, and currently overseeing a huge upgrade to the services in Greater Manchester as well. Now, over the last few days, we have talked about many things to do with the railways. We've talked about social mobility, we've talked about sustainability. This morning, we really want to concentrate on the economic benefit of railways, and particularly the relationship between urban development and the regional public transport. So I'm very delighted that John is with us this morning, and I wonder whether I could give the floor to you now, John, and you could give us an idea of what actually it is that you do in Greater Manchester.
Well, thanks very much, Sasha. I'd like to start by talking about what we're doing in Greater Manchester, but then to talk about the wider region and what we're all about, because it is that wider regional economy that concerns us particularly. And I suppose the first point is that we don't regard transport as an end in itself. It's just a means to an end. And in Greater Manchester, what that really means is the economic growth of Greater Manchester and its future prosperity. And if I look at Greater Manchester, and people may not know it too well, but we are the largest city region in UK outside London. We've got a population of 2.7 million, and that's due to grow to 3 million by 2030. It's a great centre for innovation, for culture, for sport, lots of things. And actually, we've got a fantastic economic potential there, and it's recognised as in the top 20% of Europe's economies, and it's certainly destined to grow. We've got an awful lot of people who live in our journey to work area, around about 10 million people within about 55 kilometres of us. But the fact is that actually in what we generate in tax, which is about £17 billion a year, we're actually not producing enough because we take from the state £22 billion per year. So we just have to turn that round. And really what our transport strategy is all about is how we can do that. So what we're trying to do is to, in our 2040 vision, is to say, well, how can we stimulate the economy? How can we make it flourish and prosper? And one of the keys to that is to have an integrated and sustainable transport network. So what does that really mean? Well, we've got to support our economic growth in Greater Manchester. We can't do much about the amount of space that's on the roads. The highways aren't going to get any bigger. So we have to do something rather different. We've got to be more efficient. We've got to try and move people to sustainable modes of public transport, active travel, and we're trying to do that as best we can. Now, Sasha mentioned what we've done on the tram in terms of bus priority, transport interchanges, and expanding the railway. And we've been pretty successful at that. But actually, unless we can integrate that rather better, it's not going to work. And we really need to make sure that people can have access to education, to work, and that they can have healthy lives out there and prosper. And that's particularly acute in the regional centre. It's an area where we've got greater densification. It's an area where people are increasingly want to live and work, and yet we've got to do something about public transport to make that work for them and for us. Now, 70% of trips in that city centre are made by public transport at the moment, and as we grow, we've got to at least maintain that percentage, and if not grow it, because otherwise it will not work. Because one of the key issues for us is, and it's appropriate for COP21, transport accounts for 30% of the carbon emissions that we've got. 95% of that comes from road vehicles. We've got very ambitious targets to cut that by 48% by 2020, but unless we actually make public transport grow, that's not going to happen. So there are things that we are doing, like cycling. Cycling is not traditionally one of the modes of transport, but we want to make that by 2025, 10% of all journeys to be made on bikes. That will be a 300% increase and make ourselves a cycling city. And how we integrate that with other modes of transport is really important. And then there are things like making use of new technologies, like electric buses. So we've got those in the city centre now. They're a free service. And again, it's how do we link all those things together? And then we've tried to do things about alternative energy sources. So where we introduced a Rochdale interchange, the first in Europe with integrated hydropower, that has done a lot to reduce the carbon footprint. We've got the latest of our interchanges where we've got solar panels all over it to make that more efficient. And in terms of a rail station at Horwich Parkway, it's got the largest wind turbine of its kind to actually provide half the power for the station. So these are all the sorts of things we want to do. We're introducing ultra-low emission vehicles all over the place as well, numerous electric vehicle charging points, putting them at stations, making it an integrated offer, and we want to become a pedestrian-friendly city as well. And that means wayfinding in place, having the apps on phones, trying to make this a more attractive place to use. And actually there's something to be said about the low-carbon economy. It actually offers jobs. And in Greater Manchester, we're employing about 37,000 people in that industry of itself. And that's got a growth year on year of about 4%. So it makes economic sense as well. And the other thing to add in that space is that air quality is an issue for us, and it drives the case for public transport. Some 6% of deaths across Greater Manchester are due to air pollution of various different sorts. And the cost to the economy nationally, we think, is somewhere between 8.5 billion and 20 billion a year in terms of air quality. So it's a real problem. We need to do something about it. So clean transport, public transport is the way ahead. But let me expand it a little bit to the regional level, because actually if you look at the north of England, it's got a population of about 50 people. That's larger than London or Tokyo. If we were a country in Europe, we'd be the 9th largest, bigger than Belgium or Sweden or the Czech Republic. We've got quite a lot of the best universities there. We've got advanced manufacturing. It's the home of graphene, creative, digital services. They're all there. And it's globally well connected too. We've got Manchester Airport. It's probably the largest of the 6 that we've got. And we've got some great ports as well. The trouble is that the cities of the north don't work well together. They are all isolated. They don't work together. And actually the trick is, if only we could join them up, we could become a single economy and far more powerful of ourselves. So our vision for the north is a real single economy vibrant, attractive for inward investment, and capitalising on the power of the northern cities, hence the Northern Powerhouse. Now, putting money terms to that, we estimate that actually the prize that we're going for here is to add another £37 billion per year to the 290 billion we already generate. So the economic prize of joining up is enormous. Well, how are we going to do that? Well, part of it is public transport and part of it is rail. Actually, if you want to join things up, join up by rail. So HS2, the new high-speed rail network, connects the cities of the north to the south and London. But actually, that's not enough of its own. North-south connections are fine, but actually east-west connections from Liverpool in the west to Hull and Newcastle in the east are vital. And that's why we're talking about Northern Powerhouse Rail as the next stage in that process. And the fact is actually that not everyone travels by rail. We've got to do something about roads as well. Roads still outnumber people travelling by public transport, and we are going to have to improve those. So actually, we've seen road traffic increase by 36% in the past 9 years. We have to do something about that. We need to increase the speed and resilience on our road network. So we're thinking about things like putting a 28-kilometre tunnel underneath the Pennines, our hill range, mountain range, from east to west. But that will be the longest of its kind in Europe. We need to look at freight as well, and an awful lot of freight is coming from the south of UK up to the north. Well, actually, we need to take advantage of the ports. We need to do that in a sustainable way, so what we need to do is to put more freight onto rail, and that's part of our consideration as well. And we need to connect better to airports so that we have global connectivity. And above all else, none of that's going to work unless we have an integrated and simple fares and ticketing system that everyone understands, makes it easy to use. You can use anywhere you like across the UK, and that's our target as well. So in terms of how much is transport contributing to urban growth, the answer is it's absolutely crucial. But there are three conditions that I think we need to get it right. The first is to have funding certainty in the long term, because without that, we can't plan for growth and make the investments we need. Second is to have the right powers from central government to make it work so that we can integrate our networks, we can deliver the sorts of things that our labour and skill markets need and that dense urban economies need. And finally, we need to make the most of all the technologies that are coming out there so that we can, frankly, clean up transport, make our city regions healthy, make them successful and productive places for everyone. Thanks.
Yeah, John, thank you very much. You covered an awful lot there. That's brilliant. Some really, really interesting examples. And the figure that you put on it, do you mind just giving us that figure again of if you could link up the north with railways or however you would do it, what was the figure you could quantify? So
that's £37 billion per year that we could add on top of the 290 billion that we already generate between us. So it's a massive economic prize.
Very, very much so. Gentlemen, who would like to start off by making any comments on what John said? Louis, would you...
Il y a une bonne nouvelle, l'Europe existe. L'Angleterre fait partie de l'Europe, la Grande-Bretagne. Pourquoi ? Parce qu'il n'y a pas une feuille de papier à cigarette entre ce que vous faites, ce que vous pensez, vos prévisions et ce qu'on peut imaginer en France. Alors, le transport est vital pour nos agglomérations. La vie économique de demain sera dans les villes, dans les grandes villes. Et dans ces grandes villes, nous avons des problèmes de déplacement, de mobilité, incontestablement. Mais on les trouve en France, en Grande-Bretagne, en Europe et en Chine. C'est la même chose. On a ce problème de la mobilité. Et donc, vous arrivez à la conclusion, pour aller vite, qu'il y a 3 conditions à remplir. Condition, premièrement, c'est le financement. Et nous, dans nos régions, à l'heure actuelle, nous avons quelques difficultés à trouver le financement nécessaire pour accomplir, je dirais, cette vision-là. La deuxième chose, c'est le pouvoir au niveau régional. Et là, par contre, désormais, avec les nouvelles lois qui viennent d'arriver en France, la région va pouvoir faire un schéma d'intermodalité. C'est-à-dire qu'elle aura une vision complète. C'est un des points forts du système français, c'est d'avoir une vision intermodale et de donner à un pouvoir la vision générale. Et puis, vous avez parlé de nouvelles technologies. Effectivement, avec cette économie 2.0, il faut rentrer là-dedans, je dirais, avec beaucoup d'enthousiasme, parce que de toute manière, nos clients, nos usagers, eux, ils y sont déjà.
Swept off your feet with technology, absolutely. Nicholas, would you agree that power needs to be concentrated in the urban regional area so that they can actually decide what transport they want?
Yes, well, at first I really think that urban development and transport are very much connected. Obviously, transport is a means, as you said. It's a means to decide which areas in the city will develop, but also it's a means to improve the quality of the urban landscape, even in the center of the city. And it is an opportunity to redevelop cities, aging cities. For example, when we introduced again the tramway in the French cities in the it was decided in the 70s, but basically it appeared in the 80s. It had a great success, a greater success than what expected. Why was it? At first, something new. Obviously, people decided to use public transport more than what was expected. Each time it was more than expected. It also was the opportunity to change the urban landscape from wall to wall in the street. So something that would not have been done without deciding this new transport system. And who was deciding? Basically, even there was an impulsion from the central government. Basically, it was decided by the city authorities, either the towns, I mean the mayors or the municipality councils or what we call urban community councils. But really there was the same people were in charge of deciding about transport, but not only about the transport, about what they wanted to do with the city. And I think even there have been, obviously, everything was not okay, but basically it was at the heart of the success of this promotion of the tramway in many French cities, many big cities, because there was at the same time the decision of the transport and the decision more widely about the urban development.
Do you feel that I mean, you were given a very good example of how urban planners and transport operators can work very closely together. John, do you feel they could work even closer, or do you have a good relationship between your transport operators and the actual urban planners, people who decide the shape of the city?
I think the opportunity is there for people to work far closer together than they do right now. I think in UK, where we have a very competitive environment, it's not always as straightforward as saying that operators can work directly with urban planners. But I think the opportunity is there for industry to be able to offer up some ideas about how we could do things rather differently. Because I think authorities themselves don't necessarily have all the answers, and sometimes they don't even have the questions. So where technologies are there, as an example, why wouldn't we look to industry to propose different things? So, for example, we have people talking to us at the moment about should we be looking at maglev technology? Where would autonomous vehicles fit into all this? How does the Uber revolution take a part in all this? So there are lots of things that companies can do. I mean, actually, it's appropriate today that we've got new rail franchises announced in UK for our area, which are all about a transformational specification, lots of new trains, better services. So there is a lot to go for.
You're talking a lot about how the really good public transport is making people's lives better. It's helping them find employment. You also mentioned the number of jobs that are created within the industry. I'm just wondering whether you're also finding that industries that may not have considered coming to Manchester, Greater Manchester, are now looking at you because of the public transport and relocating.
Every company that looks at us looks for two things. One, skills, and do you have the available skills in your area? Two, do they have the transport access to get people into work? And providing they've got both of those, then companies will invest. They will come, and we're seeing that a lot.
Louis, you're mayor of Cannes-sur-le-Mer. I mean, do you find that as well, that industry will look at, do you have the skills, but do you have the public transport?
Alors, dans ce domaine-là, vous êtes en avance sur nous. Parce que vous avez ouvert à la concurrence de manière très large le ferroviaire. C'est ce que je souhaite pour mon pays quand je vois les résultats, que ce soit d'ailleurs en Grande-Bretagne ou par exemple en Allemagne. Donc nous sommes dans ce domaine effectivement un peu en retrait. Pour autant, on a un avantage sans doute qui est celui d'un pays centralisé dans lequel effectivement on a un plan d'ensemble qui est celui de la région qui domine l'ensemble des autres institutions et qui va permettre justement d'assurer une cohérence entre les diverses institutions. Pour autant, si le ferroviaire n'est pas ouvert aujourd'hui à la concurrence, nous avons ce que nous appelons chez nous en France des délégations de services publics, c'est-à-dire que nous avons des appels d'offres qui permettent, par exemple dans le tram, dans les transports urbains, interurbains, là, d'avoir une concurrence. Et nous nous apercevons que nous travaillons avec les opérateurs. Nous sommes des politiques, nous avons des visions d'aménagement du territoire. Je pense qu'on y reviendra tout à l'heure. Mais nous travaillons avec les opérateurs pour aboutir au meilleur service, puisque le principal, ce n'est pas l'institution politique, ce n'est pas l'opérateur. Le principal, c'est le client.
It is the user, it is the customer. I'm just wondering whether you have industry that looks at your town, looks at Cagnes-sur-Mer and says, actually, let me relocate out of Nice and come to your area. You're smiling, so I'm imagining the answer is yes.
Ah oui. Oui, bien sûr, parce que, alors là, je vais vous donner un exemple précis. La ville de Nice était une ville qui était rétive contre les transports en commun. Et puis, nous avons eu un grand débat. Il n'y avait que des voitures. Il y avait des bus, mais c'est tout. Et donc, on a eu un très grand débat public. Il y a eu beaucoup d'opposition pour faire le tram. Mais malgré tout, la majorité a demandé le tram. Nous avons installé le tram, une ligne de tram, au milieu de la ville, dans la rue principale d'une ville qui était dédiée à la voiture. Nous n'avons pas eu la révolution. 2. Non seulement nous avons mis ce tram, mais alors, comme le disait tout à l'heure le président Jachier, ça a été un énorme succès. Et aujourd'hui, dans cette rue principale où il y a encore 10 ans, il y avait des voitures. Aujourd'hui, il y a un tram. Ce tram était parti à 50 000 voyageurs jour. Il est à 100 000 et nous sommes obligés d'augmenter. Vous voyez, il peut y avoir donc une modification du comportement de la part des clients, des usagers. Et deuxièmement, bien entendu, l'économie en profite. Parce que nous avons relié ces lignes de tram avec des parkings relais. Donc, on arrive à faire fonctionner avec cette vision-là. Et tout le monde, a priori, s'en félicite.
You work in so many different areas. I mean, is this something that you are seeing in different towns, different cities as well?
Yes. Well, obviously, companies very much take into account transport means in their decision-making process about where they put their offices, where they put their factories. Well, it's so obvious. Obviously, they take into account what exists. They take into account what is decided. But it means they have to be confident about decisions entering into force. So sometimes there are delays, political changes. There might be some problems if the decisions already announced are not put into force. Well,
you were saying your transport plan is up to 2040. Yeah, I mean, is that 2040? Is that sort of, working that many years ahead? Is that something that you would advocate?
I think 2040 is needed when you do some planning to understand where you want to go. But it's not a relevant time period for decision-making for companies. I mean, they have to be sure that in 5-year time you will have the tram, the new road, or even if it's not a rail, or what is really needed for them is a few years. I would say private investors in buildings, it might be a bit longer. I mean, I know for the time being, something very important taking place in France is Greater Paris. In fact, the Greater Paris authority is not very clear for the time being. What I said about towns, cities in France, for the time being, for Paris, not very clear. The institutions are changing from one law to another. But what is clear, that there is one body in charge of building the new metro line, Grand Paris Express. The length of it is 2/3 of the existing Paris metro. It will go around Paris at a certain distance. And already investors are considering where they will invest in which building. And it's very important for the development of the Paris area. This is crucial, really.
It is something that is seen all across the world, isn't it? And I know you're very, very much aware of that in the UK as well, London and moving up to Manchester, and actually Birmingham as well. Because should we just talk about the HS2 for the moment, the new high-speed railway, the second one for the UK. How do you view this high-speed railway? Do you look at it as, I know you'd be on the second stage, but do you look at it as being a great boon for the area, or actually are some people concerned that it will just turn the north into a suburb of the big city of the capital, London?
I think it's essential. If you look back 10 years, people were expecting railways to wither and die slightly. It was all talk of decline. Well, that hasn't happened at all. Actually, we've seen a rise of 66% in use of the railway. It's a real success story. And actually part of that has given us the problem to say, actually, some of our infrastructure is struggling to be maintained. We're struggling for capacity on the West Coast Main Line, which is where HS2 is running up to our area. So having a new railway is not a question of whether you should do it. Of course you should do it. It's absolutely essential to do it. And why wouldn't you use the technology to bring in high-speed rail to get that high-speed connection, bring everyone together that much more quickly? Yes, there have been suggestions that maybe Birmingham will be so close to London that it almost becomes a suburb. Actually, I think the reverse is true. Now we'll see more people wanting to come to Birmingham, wanting to come to Manchester. It's an opportunity for cities to grow, like Lille, like Lyon, we've seen elsewhere.
That was actually some of the concern, wasn't it, when that line was actually started in France? Nicholas, for those who are not aware of this, could you just talk us through the process of how some people were concerned that Lyon would actually become a suburb of Paris?
Yes. As was said, high-speed lines, obviously speed is important, but line is important. I mean, it was the opportunity to modernize aging infrastructure, which were not fit for the level of traffic which was needed. Obviously, being 2 hours from Paris for Lyon citizen is very different from being 4 hours from Paris. It's very different. But it has not become a suburb of Paris. Obviously, there are some people living in Lyon and working in Paris, but there are very few, in fact. But for doing business, for example, my own company, my office is in the Paris area, and we have a very important headquarters in Lyon, not far from the station. It's very easy for me to be also in Lyon, and we have strong teams there in Lyon. So it's obviously an economic opportunity to have such an infrastructure. I mean, it already dates back to a few decades now, but I think it has been very important for the French economic development. And it is still the new lines which are being built presently and which will enter into operation in a few months or a few years will change, they improve the economic situation, and they won't become just suburbs of Paris.
Quite often there is opposition to this sort of building of new infrastructure. Talking about HS2, there's concern that of the route of the line, whether it goes through areas of outstanding natural beauty in the English countryside, people's homes being affected, noise pollution often comes up. Do you feel that when you can see the economic benefits of this new infrastructure. Do you feel there should be more of the government actually enforcing purchase or enforcing this infrastructure through, and not maybe taking into account so much the views of the people? It's a tricky one. John, sorry, the look on your face then.
This is not about governments should not enforce. I think what we're trying to do is build a consensus in UK around what we're trying to do. There's a democratic process to go through. All these issues are being considered in Parliament as for the first phase of HS2 right now, and they're taking into account people's views. What we need to do is to build consensus around the case, to say there's a very good argument based on the capacity, the ageing infrastructure we're trying to replace, the benefits to everyone. There have been lots of studies out there about the economic benefits that this brings. It is a very sustainable form of transport in comparison to roads. I don't think anyone wants to see lots of new motorways built. This is the future for transport, public transport in UK.
So how do you convince those who are not quite so convinced of this then? How do you turn the argument around? Because there has been, as I'm sure there have been in other countries and other cities as well, people saying, well, actually, you're only going to knock 20 minutes off the time, or you're only going to knock half an hour off the time. So how do you convince people that actually that amount of time makes a huge economic difference?
So I think you need to turn the argument round. It's got to be away from speed. Speed is, of course, important, and there are benefits there, of course, for that. This is an argument about capacity. This is an argument about ageing infrastructure that can't be sustained. It's about routes that are struggling, and it's about how to take the rail infrastructure of UK forward, and with it comes all the benefits that go with that.
Louis, would you like to?
Ma réaction est relativement simple. Avant, Lyon était dans la banlieue de Paris. Maintenant, on pourrait presque dire que Paris est dans la banlieue de Lyon. Qu'est-ce qui se passe? Quand vous mettez un système de transport à grande vitesse, au lieu, vous êtes un cadre supérieur, vous êtes une entreprise, vous êtes à Lyon, il n'y a de bon bec qu'à Paris. Donc, il faut aller à Paris. Bon. Mais là, maintenant, vous pouvez avoir un développement économique extraordinaire. On le voit avec Lyon, mais on le voit avec Marseille. À 3 heures, Marseille, littéralement, a explosé son développement économique grâce à la grande vitesse. Et donc, vous avez un système là qui permet d'irriguer, le territoire, c'est de l'aménagement du territoire. Et l'aménagement du territoire, pour moi, est principal. C'est la première chose à voir avant les transports, parce que les transports sont un outil de la vision que vous avez de votre pays, de votre région, de votre ville. Donc, avec cette vision, nous alimentons en fait les grandes métropoles françaises, et cela permet à ces métropoles de se développer.
Nicholas.
Yes, I would add a few comments. Obviously, new infrastructure is needed in a number of cases, either inside the city or connecting cities. But renovating existing infrastructure is also important. I mentioned the tramway. I could have mentioned the metros in several important French cities. Now we are reaching time where we have to renovate them, to have them to reach an efficient level, and using obviously new technology. And we really think that part of the investment nowadays, and it's especially true for the railway network, interurban railway network, the focus in France now has to be put on renovating the existing infrastructure, which in fact, is aging, and this means this might raise some safety issue, but it also raises speed issues. I mean, without talking about high speed, but just ordinary speed is lowering. There are some cities which are, today, it's a bit longer than it was 1 century ago to connect them with Paris. I know that from a region where my country, in the countryside in Normandy. So we have to put an important effort on renovating the existing infrastructure also.
And also, as well as the infrastructure, you were talked earlier about the technology as well, which all, when you're talking about refreshing and refurbishing, it is now taking advantage of the technology. Something you mentioned, John, a little earlier, which I want to come back to, is actually the cooperation between different cities and therefore different authorities, different operators. And you also mentioned about trying to get a regulated fare system across. What challenges have you come across when you try and, sitting in one authority, one area, try and sort of coordinate with another?
I think actually the biggest change that I've seen in the UK in recent years has been the degree of cooperation between authorities. Cities have been working together like they never would before. Traditional rivalries between Manchester and Liverpool, and it's not just about football, they would compete as cities. Well, now they're actually working together, and actually some of the biggest advocates for some of the transport interventions in Manchester to the airport, for example, would come from Newcastle or from Hull. And equally, we would be advocating things in their areas, in port infrastructure and all the rest of it. Getting these authorities to work together, I mentioned the new come out today, 29 authorities from the north of England got together to agree what the specification should be. That is an indication of how well we are now cooperating. Won't agree on everything, but actually there's an enormous power when a whole region of the country comes together and says to government, that's what we want.
And you also mentioned the fare structure as well. I mean, I imagine there must be more challenges there to try and get everyone around the table to work out the finances, the money.
There's a lot to do to bring smart ticketing in a simple system across the whole region. Various different cities have got their own systems. Bringing them together will not be easy, but there is a mood, there's a momentum, there's government money now, £150 million, to try and do that across our area. So there is a lot of good things going to make it happen.
Gentlemen, we are running out of time, but I'm going to pose a question to you. If you had a blank sheet of paper, if you could design the perfect area of cities, or just one city or a large city outside a capital, however you would like to do it, what do you feel are the most important things for the public transport system to get that economic development within an urban area? What do you need? Nicholas, can I come to you first and then John?
Well, perhaps the completely new area is not what I would prefer, because I'm providing new opportunities to existing cities, existing citizens, is something very exciting. This being said, obviously, if we have to build something completely new, there is a completely new city, obviously we have to pay the utmost attention to being at the best technology level, low carbon emissions, taking advantage of obviously the digital transitional revolution, I should say, to take the best of the existing technology for transport. But as was already said, transport is a means. So we have to know what you want to do with the city, what kind of citizen, what kind of economic activity, and then you design the appropriate transport system for this city. And I think it's very important also not to oppose the different transport means. I think obviously rail, broadly speaking, from tramway to heavy rail, is very important because mass transit, because low carbon emissions. But it has to be connected with the other means. Both pedestrian, cycling, cars. All the different means have to find their own role in the city.
And Louis, what about you? If you had a blank sheet of paper and you could design
Une feuille blanche.
the transport system.
Alors, je disais tout à l'heure que si on avait une feuille blanche, eh bien la première chose, c'est de savoir quelle est la vision de la ville, de l'urbanité. L'urbanité, c'est-à-dire la façon de faire vivre des êtres humains dans un ensemble aggloméré. Et on se rend compte que nous sommes tous des êtres sociaux. Donc nous avons besoin de contact. Mais nous avons besoin aussi, quand on se déplace, de se déplacer. On commence par le début, par des trottoirs de qualité, des voiries, et on essaye de se déplacer le moins possible finalement pour éviter que les entreprises soient à l'est d'une ville et par exemple, les habitations soient à l'ouest. Donc, la conception de la ville fait que vous allez ensuite mettre des transports, et notamment donc la marche à pied, ensuite le vélo, le covoiturage, l'autopartage, le bus, le tram et le train pour irriguer. C'est un ensemble extrêmement complexe, c'est clair, et nous avons là de grands spécialistes, mais en même temps, nous qui sommes en charge de responsabilité pour créer cette ville-là et la faire vivre, eh bien, je prendrai un exemple qui est chez nous. Nous avons, grâce au président Christian Estrosi, nous avons lancé une opération d'intérêt national. Notre programme, notre projet de transport, c'est 2030. Nous sommes première ligne terminée, deuxième ligne en cours et nous allons attaquer la troisième ligne. Voilà comment on peut concevoir une ville de demain.
John, I'm going to end with you just for this question. And instead of asking you if you have a blank piece of paper, I just wonder what you would do differently. If you could design the transport system in and around Greater Manchester again, is there anything that you would do differently?
I think it's a rather different question, really. I think it's about we want to compete not just in Europe, but globally. And actually, we're dealing with cities, not just in Europe, but across the globe, particularly in the emerging economies, that are developing connectivity at a faster rate, at a better rate than us. And if we're going to compete, we have to at least have the connectivity, the systems, the capabilities that they do. If we're going to be global participants, we need global quality systems.
And when you say connectivity, are you talking about digital?
I'm talking about connectivity in public transport, in digital, the technologies, all those sorts of things. Just doing things by ourselves in a small way, we're not going to beat the race, really. We're not going to win that race. And that's what we need to do to compete economically.
And just finally, we've been talking about the role of the railways, the vital role of the railways, and it's been said before that they are the backbone of many forms of public transport. I just wonder whether I could end with just asking the three of you, what is the most important thing that you feel that you get from the railways? Just give us an idea, give us an example of what the railways have done for you, for your area, for your economy, whatever it would be. Louis, shall I start with you?
Heureusement que nous avons eu Napoléon III. Napoléon III a amené le chemin de fer jusqu'à Nice. Et aujourd'hui, vous avez une ligne qui irrigue bien sûr toute la région, qui date de cette époque-là. Et nous avons le projet d'une nouvelle ligne, bien entendu, TGV. Mais en même temps, aujourd'hui, grâce au chemin de fer, on permet d'avoir une sorte de métro pour l'ensemble de la Côte d'Azur. C'est la colonne vertébrale des transports et de la mobilité. C'est ce qu'on fait de mieux, finalement, parce qu'au niveau du développement durable, au niveau du CO2, le train est imbattable, justement, à ce niveau-là. Et donc, nous diminuons, par certains côtés, la voiture individuelle, nous favorisons le train. Et je vais vous donner encore un exemple de cette vision à très long terme. Grâce au train, aujourd'hui, nous avons une ligne directe entre Nice et Moscou.
That would take some challenges of clothes packing, I think, definitely. And Nicholas, your idea, the best thing that the rail has either contributed or will contribute in the future?
Well, it has contributed, well, in France, but in many other countries, to economic development. Again, rail, broadly speaking, I mean, even inside the cities or connecting cities. But we are here in the COP21, and really the calculation is very clear. I mean, if you want to lower carbon emissions for transporting people or transporting freight, you have to increase the share of the rail. So we really have to insist on that.
And John?
So in Manchester, we've got the home of the first intercity railway between Liverpool and Manchester, the first intercity service in the world from 1830, and fundamentally nothing's changed. It is the best form of mass transit. The big difference now is that rail offers mass transit without mass emissions, and that's the key.
I think it's a really good place to end, mass transit without the mass emissions. John, Nicholas, Louis, thank you all very much. Thank you.